Hello and welcome. I have driven past this area on the beach side of Beach Boulevard numerous times, but I honestly never realized it was a protected historical area. Today I was admiring the unique church and noticed the state monument sign. So I pulled in. You'll see that sign in a minute. It reads, First Settlement at Ruby, Florida. In 1883, construction of the Jacksonville and Atlantic Railroad was begun to serve the undeveloped area. The track was narrow gauge, running 16.54 miles from the south bank of the St. Johns River to the beach. The first settlers were William Edward Scull, a civil engineer and surveyor, and his wife, Eleanor Kennedy Scull. They lived in a tent 2 blocks east of Pablo Historical Park. A second tent was the general store and post office. On August 22, 1884, Mrs. Scull was appointed postmaster. Mail was dispatched by horse and buggy up the beach to Mayport, and from there to Jacksonville by steamer. The Jacksonville and Atlantic Railroad Company sold lots, and the housing construction began. The Sculls built the first house in 1884 on their 10th site. The settlement was named Ruby for their eldest daughter. On May 13, 1886, the town was renamed Pablo Beach. On June 15, 1925, the name was changed to Jacksonville Beach. This sign was erected in 1984 by the Beaches Area Historical Society, which is where all of the info you're going to hear today comes from. The museum sits on Beach Boulevard near 4th Street on the north side of Beach. William Scull was born in Ohio in 1858. His family moved to Jacksonville when he was 14 to tend a strawberry farm his stepfather owned there. William attended school to become a land surveyor while in Jacksonville. Eleanor Kennedy was born in Indiana in 1861 and was also 14 when her family moved to the milder climate of Florida for her mother's health. Her father was the infamous D.H. Kennedy, a name known well in Florida and especially in Tampa, where a major thoroughfare harkens his name, a thoroughfare where the ladies of the evenings stroll, interestingly enough. My personal implement on his infamy was that he was the land surveyor, developer, parlor trick monster whose shenanigans resulted in the destruction of the well-established black community in Tampa of Robles Park and literally wiped their cemetery off the maps, literally. By eminent domain, Robles Park's Zion Cemetery was taken, claiming that all the bodies were moved, that all the stones were moved. On top of it, Tampa's sixth public housing project was built, called Robles Park, mockingly, and some of Mr. Kennedy's warehouses and strip mall businesses. You can view my video about this actually. It's titled Coffins in the Front Yard. While chatting with their temporary new doctor in Jacksonville, Mr. Kennedy was offered some of Mr. Scull's strawberries. Apparently, this prompted him to decide to settle in Jacksonville. They had not yet decided where in Florida they wanted to live. If the berries grew so beautifully, then the weather here would certainly cure his wife, right? In 1875, William Scull and Eleanor Canby were wed. Ruby was born in 1882, and Bessie was born in 1884. Many folks buried in both the Jacksonville Beach public cemeteries, just a few blocks west of this current historical area, on the north and south sides of the current Beach Street. It was known as Railroad Street back then, would have been involved in the construction of this railway and this town. The southern segregated side was known as the Colored Beach Cemetery or Negro Cemetery. Now it's called Lee Kirkland. The north side was the Ruby Cemetery, now known as Warren Smith Memorial Cemetery. Lee Kirkland was the groundskeeper of the segregated cemetery and renamed in his honor after his passing. The Ruby Cemetery, holding the name of Pablo Beach, Mayor H. Warren Smith, who served in 1914 and is responsible for transferring the trust of this public cemetery to the city of now renamed Jacksonville Beach in 1925. Memorial Cemetery also holds an 8-foot marble monument commemorating the many unnamed yellow fever mass burials there during the 1888-89 scourge. It began as a public cemetery when the first unidentified, unnamed gentleman washed ashore at then Ruby Beach, Pablo Beach, eventually Jacksonville Beach, and he was buried in the 1880s, first interment at Ruby Cemetery. On these grounds are over 4,200 grave sites, but only 3,500 headstones. Plus yellow fever mass burials. Side note, William and Eleanor are not buried at Memorial Cemetery, but instead at Evergreen, which sits north of downtown on North Main, along with 9 Jacksonville mayors, several Jacksonville governors, and the infamous, though I love, Cora Crane, Jacksonville's most famous madam, common law wife and battlefield correspondent with author Stephen Crane in the Turkish-Greco War. You can reference videos in my library about Evergreen Cemetery, Lee Kirkland Cemetery, as well as Cora Crane and the area of town where her and other brothels stood, which was known as La Villa, known as Harlem before the Harlem Renaissance. Anyway, back to Pablo Historical Group. The Jacksonville Atlantic Railroad ran along the south bank of the St. Johns River to the beach. Civil engineer Kennedy hired his new son-in-law, Scull, as a surveyor for the project. In 1884, William and Eleanor temporarily closed their Jacksonville home and moved their 2 toddlers into the tent on what became Jacksonville Beach. Eleanor was appointed postmaster in August of 1884. The post office was named Ruby. Mail was dispatched by horse and buggy at low tide to Mayport and by steamer up to Jacksonville. The original colonial name of our now St. Johns River was the May River, indicating when the French colonists set their sights on it. The indigenous here, the Timucua, referred to it as Pilatka, and the now downtown Jacksonville area as Wakapilaka, or Cow Crossing, the narrowest portion. Jacksonville's earliest name was Calford, accordingly. In February of 1885, the Skulls replaced their tent with a wooden structure built from harvesting a shipwreck from the beach. This home remained a notable part of Jack's Beaks, eventually becoming the popular Dixie boarding house till it burned in 1988. In 1887, the railroad was completed, so the Skulls returned to their Jacksonville home. William passed in 1925 and Elizabeth in 1949. The church on the site is Old St. Paul's Episcopal by the Sea and is attributed to the Carpenter Gothic architect in 1887. If this style is familiar or fascinating to you, Carpenter Gothic or River Church, I suggest you may want to reference my video all about that, about the founder of that movement and the originator and first president of the Architectural Institute, or the American Institute of Architects, a gentleman by the name of Richard Upjohn. My video is titled The Episcopalian Cabinet Maker. Very interesting. The church has already been moved 2 blocks from its original location to be part of this protected cultural area. You will have noticed in the video a cracker cottage. Cracker referring to the early cowboys in Florida and the very specific whip they had, a shorter whip, and it had a very distinctive crack. The house is attributed to the Osterreicher family. Mr. Osterreicher was 19 when he married 16-year-old daughter Ortegas. If you've watched some of my videos about walking around pioneer cemeteries in the region or cleaning stones, then you will have seen a great many of both of these important Menorcan primary names. Osterreicher, Ortegas is a very significant Menorcan pioneer name. This is their home where they raised 9 children that originally sat in an area that is now Ponte Vedra Beach, specifically Nocatee. When that development was about to begin, people put the money together to move the home and add it to this historical area for preservation. Glad that it did. There's a lot of information on the placard in front of it if you want to pause and stop and go back and take a look at that. Okay, so this has been some interesting history of a large and well-developed area. But what happened after the railroad was finished? What happened after Ruby became Pablo Beach? When Cora Crane bought her home on Pablo Beach, she also bought a gentleman's hotel, shall we say. It was a playland for adults. It was also a beach. And no good beach land goes undeveloped, right? Well, eventually, Pablo Beach had a roller coaster. Then Jacksonville Mayor John T. Alsop, who I must say is the namesake of my favorite bridge in Jacksonville. Jacksonville has 7 magnificent bridges. The Alsop is my favorite. The second point is the Dames Point, the towering, cascading bridge over Mayport. He wheeled and dealed to develop the beach area via the new railroad expansion and the pariah Henry Flagler. Where the current pavilion atop the Jack's Beach Pier stands, this was the home of the Pablo Beach Coaster. John Miller of Miller and Rose Amusement Company of Milwaukee built the coaster, we are told. It was 93 feet tall, the tallest structure on the beach at the time. This first and only coaster on Jack's Beach clocked a top speed of 50 miles per hour. 3,168 feet long, 2 trains with 2 cars each, 12 riders in each car. The ride was 1.5 minutes. It reminds me a lot of the roller coaster of my childhood, an old Woody, yes, the roller coaster at the beach boardwalk in Santa Cruz, California. 1928, it was open to the public, but was always susceptible to storms, requiring seasonal closing for repairs, till it was taken out entirely by Hurricane Dora in 1964. Before that time, the beach amusements has expanded to include a Ferris wheel, game parlors, restaurants, clothing shops, and other rides, including a smaller coaster version, an all-steel Wild Mouse. We also had a Wild Mouse in Santa Cruz, and the Giant Dipper, as it was called, which I think is the second oldest wooden roller coaster in the country, and the Wild Mouse were my favorite rides. So I have some images here that I have taken from the internet of Pablo Beach at the time. This was a delightful side road for me. I didn't expect to do this. I'm glad I did.